My name is Daniel Alvarez, and for most of my life, I believed that family came before everything. That was the lesson my parents drilled into me. From the time I was a boy running around barefoot in our little suburban neighborhood all the way through my first day at work. Family sticks together. Family sacrifices. Family comes first. My father, Ricardo, used to say, slapping his hand against the dining table for emphasis, as though the words themselves were law. My mother, Alina, would always nod beside him, her lips pressed into a thin smile that dared me or my younger sister to disagree. And for years, I carried that lesson like a badge of honor. I wanted to believe we were close-knit, that the Alvarez family was different. While other kids in school talked about divorces, fights, and money problems, I told myself we were solid. Sure, we weren't rich far from it, but we were supposed to have what mattered: unity, loyalty, and trust. But the truth was nothing like the story I had been fed. Childhood expectations: I grew up in a modest 2-bedroom rental. My father worked as a mechanic. My mother did part-time bookkeeping for a small business, and together they scraped by. We weren't destitute, but we weren't comfortable either. Every purchase was weighed, every extra snack questioned, every school trip debated. Do you think money grows on trees, Daniel? My mother would hiss whenever I asked for new sneakers, even though mine had holes in the soles. It's just temporary. My father would sigh, his face streaked with grease after a long day in the shop. When you're older, when you start working, things will get better. We'll all get better together. That line stuck with me. We'll all get better together. At the time, it felt comforting, like a promise. But looking back now, 'twas less a promise and more a plan, one in which I was unknowingly cast as the provider long before I even had a paycheck. The golden child and the forgotten one. I wasn't an only child. I had a younger sister, Marisol, who was 3 years my junior. From as early as I can remember, the rules were different for her. She was delicate, my mother always said, sensitive, special. While I was sent to mow the lawn, carry groceries, or fix things around the house, Marisol was allowed to rest, to focus on her studies, to find her passion. Whenever I complained, my father's voice would thunder across the room. Don't be jealous of your sister. You're the man of the house, Daniel. A man's job is to provide, to sacrifice. So I swallowed my frustration. I worked harder at school, hoping the good grades would earn me praise. But the most I'd ever hear was a flat. That's expected. Meanwhile, if Marisol so much as painted a picture or got a B in math, my parents would beam with pride. She's going places, my mother would say, running her hand through Marisol's hair. She has potential. I'd stand there, invisible, my report card burning in my hand, and wonder if they had forgotten I existed. My first job when I turned 16, I begged my parents to let me work part-time. At first they resisted, insisting I needed to focus on school. But then my father's eyes lit up one evening at the dinner table. You know, he said slowly, a part-time job would teach you responsibility. And whatever you make can go into the family pot. We'll save it for college or emergencies. At the time, I thought it was fair. I was naive enough to believe that if I contributed, it would show them I was serious. That maybe, just maybe, they would finally see me. So I took a job at a local grocery store, stocking shelves late into the night. My paychecks weren't much, barely enough to cover gas and a few personal items, but every week I dutifully handed them over to my mother. She would tuck the money into a worn envelope in the kitchen drawer, pat my cheek, and say, "This is for us, for our future, for our future." College dreams and the family net. By the time I graduated high school, I had dreams of college. Not Ivy League or anything, but maybe a decent state university. I had worked hard, gotten decent grades, and saved doors, so I thought. When I sat down with my parents to discuss tuition, I remember the way my stomach dropped as they exchanged nervous glances. "Daniel," my father began, his voice heavy, "college is expensive." "Too expensive. We've been using the money you gave us for bills, groceries, rent. You know how tight things are." I stared at him, my chest tightening. "So there's nothing left? All the money I worked for, all those nights gone?" My mother reached for my hand, her expression soft but unyielding. "It wasn't wasted. It kept this family afloat. You should be proud. I wanted to scream, but instead I swallowed the bitterness. They told me to take a year off to keep working, to save again. And so I did. I worked full-time at the grocery store, then later at a warehouse, sweating through double shifts. Every paycheck I handed over. Every dollar I was told was going toward our survival. College slipped further and further away, and my sister was preparing for her art school applications, funded by the very money I had sacrificed. Early adulthood and resentment by my early 20s, resentment simmered in me like a pot about to boil over. I still lived at home, partly because I couldn't afford to move out, and partly because my parents insisted. Why would you waste money on rent, Daniel? Stay here. Help us. Save, one day you'll thank us. But I didn't feel thankful. I felt trapped. I watched as Marisol enrolled in a prestigious art program. Her supplies paid for, her rent covered when she moved into a little studio apartment in the city. My parents bragged about her constantly, telling anyone who would listen about their talented daughter. And me, I was the workhorse, the invisible son whose paycheck was absorbed into the family black hole. A glimmer of independence, the turning point began when I was 24. I had been promoted at the warehouse to a supervisor position. The pay wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. And for the first time, I saw the possibility of independence. I started secretly siphoning off small amounts of my paycheck before giving the rest to my parents. It wasn't much, just a couple hundred here and there, but it was mine. I opened a separate bank account they didn't know about. Every time I looked at the growing balance, I felt a surge of hope, like I was finally reclaiming a piece of myself. But with independence came guilt. Years of conditioning had taught me that to keep money for myself was selfish, ungrateful. My mother would often look at me suspiciously and ask, "Is this all of it?" When I handed her my pay, "Yes, Mom," I'd lie, my stomach twisting. That secret account became both my lifeline and my prison. The family's growing demands, it wasn't enough that I gave them my money. As I got older, the demands expanded. If the car broke down, it was my responsibility to cover repairs. If rent was late, my paycheck bailed them out. Holidays. I was expected to buy gifts for everyone, even when no one gave me anything in return. And through it all, I convinced myself that one day it would pay off. One day they would recognize the years of sacrifice. One day they would be proud of me. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was nothing more than their safety net. The foreshadowing of the event one night when I was 26, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. I had come home late from work, exhausted, and paused when I heard my name. "Alina, we can't keep expecting Daniel to pay for everything," my father whispered. "Why not?" My mother snapped. "He owes us. We raised him, didn't we? He has a good job, no wife, no kids. What else does he need money for?" I stood frozen in the hallway, my chest aching. He owes us. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. And for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a life where I wasn't chained to them. A life where my sacrifices ended and theirs began. And I had no idea that the day of reckoning, the event that would shatter. Everything was closer than I thought. I wish I could tell you there was one single moment when I woke up and realized what my parents were doing to me. But the truth is, it wasn't some dramatic thunderclap of revelation. It was slow. It was years of tiny cuts, years of giving and giving, waiting for the day when they would finally give back. But the humiliation, the moment that burned itself into my memory, the moment that made me swear I'd never let them control me again, that came at Marisol's graduation party. The celebration that wasn't mine. My sister Marisol was always the star of the family. She studied art, but in my parents' eyes, she could have been the next Picasso. They funded her supplies, her apartment, even her fancy internships that didn't pay a dime. While I was running forklifts at the warehouse, she was traveling with her art collective to New York and Chicago. When she finally finished her degree, my parents decided to throw her a huge party. Not just a dinner, not a quiet family gathering. No, they rented out a banquet hall, hired a catering service, even ordered custom decorations with her name printed in glittering gold. Guess who paid for most of it? That's right, me. When my father told me the cost, I nearly choked. Dad, that's almost 2 months of my paycheck. How am I supposed to cover rent? Gas, my bills. He waved me off with that dismissive hand gesture I knew too well. Don't talk to me about bills, Daniel. This is your sister's big day. You should be proud to support her. Support her. Always her. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to slam my fist on the table and shout no more. But instead, I swallowed the words and handed over the money. Because that's what I had been trained to do. The night of the party, the banquet hall glowed with string lights, the tables covered in white linens and gold runners. Guests milled around with glasses of champagne laughing, congratulating my sister as if she'd just cured cancer instead of graduating with a degree in fine arts. I stood in the corner in a cheap suit, watching as Marisol soaked up the praise. My parents hovered near her like bodyguards, basking in her reflected glory. Look at our daughter. My mother gushed to anyone who would listen. She's going to be famous one day. We always knew she had talent. Not once did they mention the son who had footed the bill for this spectacle. Not once did they acknowledge the sacrifices I had made to make it possible. I tried to smile, tried to pretend I was happy for her, but inside I felt hollow. The toast, the humiliation, reached its peak when my father tapped his glass for silence. The room quieted, all eyes on him. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice booming with pride. Thank you for joining us to celebrate our wonderful daughter Marisol. She has worked so hard and we couldn't be prouder of the young woman she has become. Applause filled the room. My sister beamed, soaking it all in. And my father continued, raising his glass higher. None of this would have been possible without Alana, my beautiful wife, the backbone of this family. The crowd clapped again. My mother dabbed her eyes with a napkin, pretending to be modest. Then came the knife. And of course, my father said, pausing dramatically, we can't forget about our son, Daniel. He may not be as talented as his sister, but he's dependable. Always working, always. Doing what needs to be done. The words hit me like a slap. Not as talented. That's how he chose to describe me. After everything I had sacrificed. The guests chuckled politely, some glancing at me with awkward smiles, others whispering behind their hands. I forced a smile, my face burning. My heart pounded in my chest, but I stayed silent. Because what else could I do? 'Cause a scene? Embarrass myself further. Marisol's dig as if my father's words weren't enough. Marisol decided to twist the knife. After the toast, she floated over to me, still glowing from all the attention. Thanks for helping pay for all this, she said, sipping her champagne. I know Mom and Dad couldn't have done it without you. For a moment, I felt a flicker of relief. Maybe she actually appreciated it. Maybe I wasn't invisible after all. But then she laughed, a high, mocking sound. It's kind of ironic, though, isn't it? You work all those hours at the warehouse just so I can celebrate becoming an artist. It's like you were meant to support me. Her words cut deeper than she could have known. Or maybe she knew exactly what she was doing. Either way, I felt the ground shift beneath me. The whispered insults later that night, I overheard a group of relatives talking. I had gone to the hallway to catch my breath to escape the suffocating cheer of the party. But as I passed by a cluster of cousins, I caught my name. Daniel. One of them snickered. He's just the work mule. Always has been. Yeah, another added, poor guy. He doesn't even have a life of his own. Everything goes to his parents and sister. Laughter followed, muffled but cruel. I wanted to storm in and confront them, but I froze. Their words were too close to the truth. I wasn't just the mullah, I was the fool. The breaking point, the final humiliation, came when it was time to pay the catering bill. The manager pulled me aside, an apologetic smile on his face. Sir, your card was declined. My stomach dropped. That can't be right. But it was. My parents had insisted I use my card for the deposit weeks before, promising they'd handle the rest. Only they hadn't. The full balance had rolled onto me, and now the card was maxed out. I turned to my father, panic in my voice. Dad, the card? He frowned, annoyed more than concerned. We'll figure it out later. Don't make a scene. Later. I hissed. "This is thousands of dollars, Dad. I can't lower your voice," he snapped. "This is your sister's night. Don't ruin it." And just like that, I was silenced again. Forced to smile through the shame, forced to pretend everything was fine while inside, I was drowning. Alone in the parking lot after the party ended, I slipped outside into the cool night air. The laughter and music still drifted from the hall, but out here it was quiet. I leaned against my car, my head in my hands, and let the humiliation wash over me. The insults, the mockery, the endless sacrifices, it all came crashing down. How much longer can I do this? I thought, how much more of myself do I have to give before they finally see me? But deep down, I already knew the answer. They would never see me. Not unless I forced them to. And in that parking lot, under the glow of a flickering streetlight, I made a silent vow. One day, I would break free. One day they would regret every cruel word, every selfish demand, every ounce of humiliation they had piled on me. They thought I was weak. They thought I would always bend, always sacrifice, always hand over my life without question. But they were wrong. So very wrong. If humiliation was the spark that lit the fire inside me, then what happened afterward was the fuel that turned it into an inferno. That night outside the banquet hall, I swore things would change. But I didn't yet know how. I only knew I couldn't keep living as their workhorse. Fate, however, has a strange way of opening doors, sometimes in the ugliest, most unexpected places. Cracks in the foundation the weeks after Marisol's graduation party were some of the darkest of my life. My credit card was maxed out. The catering bill had pushed me into debt I couldn't immediately cover. My parents acted as if nothing had happened, as if the entire night hadn't left me hollow. "Your sister's party was beautiful, wasn't it?" my mother would say casually, sipping her coffee in the mornings. "Everyone had such a wonderful time. That was thanks to you. Thanks to me. Always thanks to Minerva for me." Meanwhile, I watched Marisol post photos from the party online, each caption dripping with gratitude for our parents, as though I hadn't been the one footing the bill. I was barely mentioned. Invisible again. But the facade of family unity was starting to crack. For the first time, I stopped handing over my full paycheck. I still gave them a portion enough to avoid suspicion, but I began funneling larger amounts into my secret account. I tightened my budget, skipped nights out, and lived on the bare minimum. Every dollar I saved became a weapon, though I didn't yet know how I'd use it. The overheard conversation one Saturday morning, as I came down the stairs, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. Their voices were low, tense. "We can't keep this up, Ricardo," my mother whispered. "What choice do we have?" My father grumbled. "We need Daniel's money for the rent. Without it, we'd be out on the street." My chest tightened. The rent. I paused on the steps, my breath caught in my throat. They hadn't just been using my money for emergencies or groceries. They had been relying on it to keep a roof over their heads. "Alina," my father continued, "we're too deep in debt. The landlord's threatening to raise the rent again. If Daniel ever pulls away, we're finished." Finished, I stood frozen, my heart pounding. It was the first time I truly understood. I wasn't their son in their eyes. I was their lifeline, their safety net, their hostage. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. Pity drained away, replaced by cold, burning clarity. Meeting the landlord a few weeks later, I ran into Mr. Harris, the landlord who owned the small 2-bedroom house we rented. He was an older man, sharp-eyed but kind in a distant sort of way. I usually avoided him. Interactions with landlords meant money, and money meant arguments with my parents. But this time, I didn't look away. "Daniel," he greeted, adjusting his cap. "How's work?" "Busy, as always," I replied. Then, before I could stop myself, I asked, "Hey, is it true you're raising the rent?" He sighed, "Afraid so. Costs are going up. Your parents are already behind as it is. I've been cutting them slack, but I can't do that forever." Behind, the word sank like a stone in my stomach. My parents hadn't told me they were late on rent. Instead, they had smiled at the kitchen table while funneling my paychecks into their own expenses. Then Mr. Harris said something that changed everything. "Truth be told, Daniel, I'm tired of renting this place out. Thinking about selling it. Too much hassle for me these days. Selling it? The words rang in my ears like church bells. I forced myself to stay calm, to nod politely. But inside, my mind was racing. If he sells the house, and I buy it. It was too wild a thought to process fully at that moment, but a seed had been planted. Discovering the truth about the finances that night, I decided to dig deeper. For years, I had blindly trusted my parents' version of our family finances. They told me we were barely surviving, that my money was essential, that there was no other choice. But now I wanted proof. While they were out at Marisol's art show, I rifled through the old drawer in the kitchen where they kept bills and letters. My hands shook as I opened envelopes, scanned overdue notices, and flipped through receipts. What I found made my blood run cold. Credit card debts in their names, loan agreements, overdue utility bills. And at the center of it, all the rent statements from Mr. Harris. They had been months behind at times, barely scraping by. And yet there were also receipts for luxuries, spa days for my mother, new tools for my father, extravagant gifts for Marisol. They hadn't just been using my money for survival. They had been living beyond their means, confident that I would always catch them when they fell. I sank into a chair, clutching the papers, my chest heaving. All those years, all those sacrifices. And this was the truth. I wasn't supporting the family. I was enabling them. The opportunity for days, I couldn't shake the thought of Mr. Harris selling the house. The idea gnawed at me, impossible to ignore. I began running numbers, calculating how much I had saved in my secret account. It wasn't enough to buy a house outright, not yet, but with a loan. With my steady job and credit history, it might be possible. One evening, I stayed late at work and pulled up mortgage calculators, real estate listings, anything I could find. For the first time, I felt a rush of power. The possibility wasn't just a fantasy. It was real. If I bought the house, everything would change. My parents, who had held me hostage for years, would suddenly be renting from me. The thought made my pulse race. The humiliation they had piled on me at Marisol's party replayed in my mind, fueling me like gasoline poured on fire. Planting the mask, I knew I couldn't let them suspect anything. If my parents caught wind of my plan, they would sabotage it, convince me it was foolish, guilt me into handing over the money, maybe even steal from me outright. So I played my role. I kept handing them smaller portions of my paycheck. I nodded along when they complained about money. I even offered to cover small bills here and there, just to maintain the illusion. But behind the mask, I was strategizing, saving, meeting with a bank advisor in secret, quietly talking to Mr. Harris about his selling price. Every step brought me closer to freedom and to the revenge I didn't even know I craved until then. The shift in me, for the first time in my life, I stopped seeing myself as their victim. I started seeing myself as the architect of my future. I remember standing in front of the mirror one morning, staring at my reflection. For years, I had seen a tired, worn-down man with hollow eyes. But now I saw someone dangerous. Someone capable. Someone who had been underestimated for far too long. They think I'm weak, I whispered to myself. But they have no idea. The words tasted like steel. The first step toward power, the day I signed the initial paperwork with the bank, I felt like I was committing a crime. My hands trembled as I held the pen, as if I were betraying some sacred code. But then I thought about Marisol laughing at me, about my father calling me not as talented, about my mother's smug smile every time she pocketed my paycheck. And the trembling stopped. I signed with steady hands. Walking out of that office, papers tucked under my arm, I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time, I was holding something tangible. Not just dreams, not just vows whispered in parking lots, but a plan. The revelation weeks later, when Mr. Harris accepted my offer, I sat in my car in stunned silence. The house where I had been raised. The house where my parents had controlled me. The house that had been my prison was now mine. I had done it. They had taken my salary for years. They had bled me dry. But now the tables had turned. They were still living in that house, blissfully unaware that their landlord was no longer Mr. Harris. It was me. And when they found out, it would shatter them. Closing thoughts of the section that was the revelation. That was the twist I never saw coming. That the very prison they had kept me locked in would become my weapon of freedom. The humiliation of the graduation party had left me broken. But this revelation put me back together, stronger, sharper. And with a plan that would bring justice in the most poetic way possible. And though I hadn't yet revealed it to them, I savored the secret like a fine wine. Because I knew. The day of reckoning was coming. The day I became the legal owner of the house, I felt like I was walking on air. I kept the paperwork tucked neatly in a folder, hidden away in my room like a forbidden treasure. Every time I looked at it, a surge of power coursed through me. They thought I was still their obedient son, still the workhorse who would bend under every demand. But in reality, I was now their landlord. The irony was delicious. And I knew I wouldn't keep it a secret forever. No, the revelation needed to be perfect. It needed to be dramatic. Undeniably reckoning they couldn't wriggle out of. The setup for justice for weeks. I played my role. I kept up the charade, handing over portions of my paycheck, listening to their endless complaints about bills, nodding as they ranted about how unfair life was. Meanwhile, I prepared. The lease renewal was coming up. Every year around the same time, Mr. Harris used to send a letter with the new terms. A little increase here, a clause there. This year, that letter would come from me. I crafted it carefully, polite, professional, stamped with my name at the bottom. The rent would increase modestly at first, but the letter would also state, in black and white, that ownership of the property had changed. The day I slipped the envelope into our mailbox, my hands were steady, my heart pounding with anticipation. The discovery, it was a Tuesday evening when my father found the letter. I was in my room when I heard his voice boom from the kitchen. "Alina, get in here. You won't believe this." I strolled down the hall, my face neutral, though inside I was buzzing with electricity. My mother stood beside him, clutching the letter, her eyes scanning the words in disbelief. This can't be right," she muttered. "The landlord, it says." She trailed off, her gaze lifting to me. My father turned the paper over in his hands, his voice rising. "Daniel, what the hell is this?" I leaned against the doorway, arms folded, and let the silence stretch before I answered. "It's exactly what it says. Mr. Harris sold the house." To me, their faces drained of color. My mother's lips parted in shock. My father sputtered, his voice breaking. You bought the house. With what money?" I smiled, a bitter edge to my words. "With the money you didn't take from me. With the money I saved while you drained me dry for years." The silence that followed was suffocating. For once, they had no immediate comeback. The explosion, then came the explosion. My father slammed his fist on the table. "You betrayed us. After everything we've done for you, everything you've done for me." I snapped, my voice sharper than it had ever been. "You stole my paychecks. You lied to me about college. You humiliated me at Marisol's graduation, treating me like I was nothing. That's what you've done for me." My mother's voice wavered. "We did what we had to, Daniel. We're family. I cut her off, laughing bitterly. Family doesn't chain their son like a workhorse. Family doesn't use their child as a crutch while spoiling their daughter with luxuries. You didn't want a son, you wanted an ATM. Their eyes widened, but I didn't stop. Years of swallowed words, years of humiliation, years of resentment poured out of me like a dam breaking. Well, guess what? The ATM owns the roof over your head now. Marisol's reaction, as if the scene wasn't already intense. Marisol chose that moment to walk in, dropping her bag on the counter. She looked around at the stunned faces, then at the letter in my father's hand. "What's going on?" she asked, frowning. My mother shoved the paper at her. Marisol's eyes flicked over the words, and within seconds her jaw dropped. "You're the landlord now," she said, turning to me. "You bought the house." "That's right," I replied evenly. She laughed, but there was no humor in it, just disbelief. "You? The guy who stocks shelves and runs forklifts? You couldn't even afford new clothes half the time." I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. Maybe because I was too busy funding your parties and your art projects while you played princess? While you basked in mom and dad's praise, I was breaking my back to keep the lights on. Her smile faltered, the weight of my words sinking in. The turning of the tables from that day forward, the dynamic in the house shifted completely. Every interaction was charged with tension. My parents tiptoed around me, their voices tight, their eyes darting with unease. When rent day came, they tried to act as though nothing had changed. My mother approached me with her usual soft voice. "Daniel, sweetheart, about the rent this month. Can we have a little more time?" I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "The due date is the 1st of the month. Just like it's always been. I expect payment on time." Her face crumpled, and for once, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The public confrontation, but the true climax came not in private, but in public. It was at another family gathering, this time for Marisol's birthday. My parents insisted on hosting, even though they could barely afford the spread of food. Relatives filled the living room, laughter and chatter filling the air. I stayed quiet at first, sipping my drink, watching as the familiar dynamics played out. My parents bragging about Marisol, minimizing me. But this time, I wasn't invisible. This time, I held the ultimate card. When my father once again raised a glass to toast my sister, referring to me as our steady mule of a son, I set my drink down and stood. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the room, "there's something everyone here should know." The chatter died instantly. All eyes turned to me. I pulled a folded copy of the deed from my jacket pocket and laid it on the table. "This house you're all sitting in, the one my parents rent, it doesn't belong to them. It belongs to me." Gasps filled the room. My parents froze, their faces red with shock and shame. "For years," I continued, my voice steady and clear, "I gave my salary to them. Every paycheck, every hour I worked it went into their hands. They used me like a bank. And while they bragged about Marisol's talent, I was the one keeping this family afloat. Well, I'm done being the mule. I own this house now, and they pay me to live here." The room erupted in whispers and stares. Relatives gawked, some smirking with barely disguised satisfaction, others shaking their heads in disbelief. My parents sat frozen, humiliated in the very spotlight they had always tried to deny me. And I felt lighter than air. The aftermath, the fallout was immediate. My parents' reputation among the family crumbled. The story spread like wildfire, how they had exploited their son, how he had turned the tables and bought the very roof over their heads. For once, people looked at me with respect, not pity, not condescension, but respect. Some even clapped me on the back, muttering, "Good for you, Daniel." Marisol avoided me for weeks, her pride too wounded to face me. My parents sulked in silence, too embarrassed to look me in the eye. And every time they handed me the rent, I felt the sweetest justice of all. They were finally paying me. The justice served, I won't lie, wasn't just about the money. It was about power. It was about showing them that I wasn't weak, that I wasn't invisible, that I wasn't the mule they had trained me to be. It was about reclaiming my life. Standing in that living room, watching their humiliation unfold, I realized I had finally achieved what I had longed for my entire life: vindication. They had taken my salary for years. Now, they would pay for every cent. And the best part? They would do it under my roof. When the dust settled after the confrontation, life didn't magically turn into a fairy tale. There was no dramatic apology from my parents, no sudden embrace where they admitted they were wrong. No, that would have been too easy. What came instead was silence. Heavy, suffocating silence that filled the house like smoke after a fire. The cold days that followed, my parents barely looked at me. My father avoided me altogether, retreating into long naps on the couch or disappearing into the garage. My mother cooked meals in stony quiet, sliding plates across the table without meeting my eyes. And Marisol. She stormed off to her apartment in the city and refused to come home for weeks. She couldn't stand the idea that the brother she'd always dismissed was now the one in control. For a while, the silence unsettled me. I wasn't used to this kind of distance. All my life, I'd been suffocated by their demands, their expectations, their control. And now that I had broken the chain, part of me almost missed the noise. Almost. But then rent day came. The first rent payment, it was the first of the month when my parents slid an envelope across the table toward me. The gesture was small, but the meaning was massive. Inside was their rent check. My father wouldn't look at me. My mother's lips were pressed tight, her face pale. I opened the envelope slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch. Then I nodded, tucking it away. "Thank you," I said simply. It was the sweetest thank you I had ever given. Because for the first time, they were acknowledging, if not with words, then with action, that I wasn't their servant anymore. I was the one they depended on. Small shifts over the months that followed. Small shifts began to happen. My parents still never admitted their mistakes outright, but the way they treated me began to change. My mother started asking me for advice about bills, her voice softer than before. My father, though still distant, no longer barked commands at me. He had lost that authority the moment I became his landlord. And Mary saw. She avoided me, but I saw the change in her too. When she finally visited one weekend, she was quieter, less smug, her laughter forced. She no longer had the audacity to mock Minot when she knew the truth everyone else now knew. Conversations in the dark one night. Weeks later, my mother knocked on my bedroom door. I hesitated before letting her in. She sat on the edge of my bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Daniel," she said softly, "I know you're angry. I know you feel like we failed you." I almost laughed. Failed me? You bled me dry for years. But I kept my face calm, waiting for her to continue. "We did what we thought we had to. Maybe we pushed too hard. Maybe we leaned on you more than we should have. But you're still our son. We still love you." Her words were fragile, uncertain, like she was testing if I'd believe them. I met her gaze steadily. Love isn't taking everything from someone until they have nothing left. Love isn't treating your son like a mule while praising your daughter for breathing. If you loved me, Mom, you would have protected me, not used me. She flinched, her eyes glistening. For once, she had no reply. My freedom, the more time passed, the freer I felt. I no longer lived under their control. Every paycheck that hit my bank account was mine. I paid my own bills, built my own savings, and planned my own future. I even started taking classes again slowly online at first. The dream of higher education that they had stolen from me wasn't gone. It was just delayed. And now I was reclaiming it. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. The ripple effect word of what happened spread through the extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins, they all knew the story. Some pitied my parents, whispering about how humiliating it must have been. But most of them respected me. At family gatherings, relatives who once ignored me now sought me out. They asked about my work, my plans, even congratulated me for finally standing up for yourself. It was vindication in its purest form. And every time I saw my parents squirm under those watchful eyes, I felt a grim satisfaction. They had made me invisible for years. Now they couldn't escape the spotlight of their own shame. My relationship with Marisol eventually came back around, though things were never the same between us. One afternoon, she sat across from me in the kitchen, stirring her coffee with uncharacteristic silence. Finally, she said, "You really surprised me, Daniel. I didn't think you had it in you." I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't think I had what in me?" "Strength," she admitted, almost grudgingly. "I always thought you were just, well, the dependable one, the boring one. But you proved us all wrong." Her words were the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get from her. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need her approval anymore. I didn't need any of their approval. I had proven myself not to them, but to me. Lessons learned looking back now, I realized the lesson wasn't about money. It wasn't even about revenge, though I won't deny how sweet that tasted. The real lesson was about self-worth. For years, I believed my value came from what I could give, from how much I could sacrifice, from how much I could endure. But now I see the truth. My worth isn't tied to anyone else's expectations. It isn't measured by how much I bend or break for others. My worth is mine, and it always was. Hope for the future. I won't pretend everything is perfect now. My parents still live in the house, still pay rent, still carry the weight of their own pride. Our relationship is complicated, scarred, but I'm no longer their prisoner. I've started saving for my own place, one that will truly be mine, not tied to them in any way. One day soon, I'll hand them notice and move out, leaving them to face the reality of their dependence without me under the same roof. And when that day comes, I'll walk away with my head high, knowing I carved my own freedom. Final reflection: if you've ever been taken advantage of by the people who were supposed to love you most, I want you to hear this. You're not weak. You're not invisible. And you're not bound to their chains forever. It might take time. It might take sacrifice. It might even take years. But one day, you'll find your strength. And when you do, the power shifts. They took my salary for years. They mocked me, used me, humiliated me. But in the end, I turned their prison into my weapon. I became the landlord of their lives, and with every rent check they hand me, I'm reminded of one truth. Justice, when it finally comes, is worth the wait. And that's how I turned years of pain into justice. What about you? Have you ever been taken advantage of by the very people you trusted the most? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story kept you hooked, don't forget to hit that like button and make sure you subscribe with the bell turned on, so you never miss the next drama of betrayal and revenge. Thank you for watching, and remember, in the end, the truth always comes out.